March 17th, 1943. 0342 hours. North Atlantic. 47 degrees north, 32 degrees west. 680 miles southwest of Iceland. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Hoffmann pressed his eye against the attack periscope of U-507, watching the dark silhouettes of merchant ships crawl across the horizon like a herd of steel whales moving through the pre-dawn darkness. 23 vessels in convoy formation, their running lights extinguished, moving at perhaps 8 knots, easy prey for a wolf with patience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 23 Schiffe, he whispered to his executive officer, Oberleutnant zur See, Werner Müller. 23 ships. The convoy is fat and slow. They have no idea we're here. What Korvettenkapitän Hoffmann didn't know, what none of the veteran U-boat commanders prowling the Atlantic convoy routes could have imagined, was that at that precise moment, invisible centimetric radar waves were painting his submarine's conning tower on cathode ray screens aboard 3 Allied escort vessels positioned 18 miles away. Within 18 months, this technology would transform the Atlantic Ocean from a German hunting ground into a graveyard for U-boats, turning the invisible hunters into prey, tracked by electromagnetic eyes they couldn't see, hear, or evade. Hoffmann had earned his Knight's Cross during the happy time of 1941–42, when U-boats operated with near impunity against inadequately protected Allied shipping. His patrol log showed 31 merchant ships sunk, totaling 187,000 gross registered tons, enough tonnage to supply an entire Allied division for 6 months. He was an ace, a veteran of 42 combat patrols, a master of the art of submarine warfare perfected by Admiral Karl Dönitz's Wolfpack tactics. The Type 7C U-boat he commanded was the most successful submarine design of the war. At 220 feet long and displacing 769 tons surfaced, it could dive to 750 feet, cruise at 17 knots on the surface using twin supercharged diesel engines, and maintain 7 knots submerged on electric motors. Its 14 torpedoes, 4 in forward tubes, 1 in the stern tube, and 9 reloads, represented enough firepower to devastate an entire convoy if positioned correctly. More importantly, the U-boat's greatest weapon was stealth. On the surface at night, the low profile of the conning tower presented a minimal radar signature, or so German naval intelligence believed. The submarine's dark gray paint scheme made visual detection nearly impossible beyond 2,000 yards. Submerged, it was essentially invisible to surface ships lacking sonar or depth charges positioned directly overhead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They still rely on visual lookouts, Hoffmann said, surveying the convoy through his periscope. Like fighting in the previous war. They haven't learned. We own the night. What Hoffmann saw through his periscope confirmed every assumption about Allied inadequacy. The merchant ships maintained loose formation, their escort vessels, 3 corvettes and 2 destroyers, patrolling predictable patterns along the convoy's flanks. No aggressive zigzagging, no random course changes, no indication they suspected a predator circled in the darkness. "Battle station's torpedo," Hoffmann ordered quietly. "We'll surface at 4,000 meters. Close to 2,000 meters on diesel engines, fire a spread of 4 torpedoes, crash dive, and be gone before they know what happened." His crew had executed this maneuver successfully dozens of times. Surface approach under darkness, fire from beyond visual detection range, dive deep, escape while the convoy scattered in confusion. The Allies called it the Wolfpack tactic. Multiple U-boats coordinating attacks that overwhelmed escort defenses through sheer numbers and aggression. But something had changed in the Atlantic that Hoffmann and his fellow commanders didn't yet understand. The rules of the hunt had been rewritten by physicists and engineers working in laboratories thousands of miles from the killing ground.
January 1942, the second happy time. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat force, immediately recognized an opportunity. American merchant shipping along the eastern seaboard operated with peacetime complacency. Ships sailed independently, coastal cities remained fully lit at night, and anti-submarine defenses were virtually non-existent. The results were catastrophic for the Allies. In January 1942 alone, U-boats sank 62 merchant ships in American waters, totaling 327,000 gross registered tons. By June 1942, losses exceeded 700,000 tons monthly. Ships were torpedoed within sight of Miami beaches, their burning hulks visible to horrified vacationers. Oil slicks and debris washed ashore along the Carolinas. Bodies of merchant sailors appeared on Florida beaches. Kapitänleutnant Hans Vogel, commanding U-203 during operations off Cape Hatteras, described the period in his war diary. "It is a massacre, not warfare. The Americans sail with navigation lights burning, silhouetted against illuminated coastal cities. We operate on the surface at night with complete impunity. Detection is impossible. Our lookouts spot targets before their lookouts spot us. By the time they realize they're under attack, torpedoes are already running. Last night, we sank 4 tankers and 2 freighters in 6 hours. We surfaced between attacks to recharge batteries and reposition. Not once did we detect enemy aircraft or patrol vessels. The Americans are blind in the darkness. This is easier than training exercises." The statistics told a story of Allied helplessness. In the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats sank 585 merchant ships in American waters, with the loss of only 7 U-boats. The kill ratio was 83-1 in Germany's favor. At this rate of attrition, Britain would be starved into submission before American industrial production could make a difference. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. I was even more anxious about this battle than I had been about the glorious air fight called the Battle of Britain." The Allies' anti-submarine warfare capabilities in early 1942 were primitive to the point of uselessness. Detection relied primarily on visual lookouts. Human eyes straining to spot a periscope or conning tower against the ocean's vast expanse. At night, this was essentially impossible. ASDIC, later called sonar, the Allies' primary underwater detection system, had severe limitations. It could detect submerged submarines at ranges up to 2,500 yards under ideal conditions, but surface clutter, thermal layers, and the submarine's ability to dive deep created massive blind spots. More critically, ASDIC was useless against surfaced submarines, and German U-boats spent 90% of their time on the surface, submerging only to attack or evade. Commander James Stirling, Royal Navy, commanding the destroyer HMS Wolverine in early 1943, described the frustration. "We knew U-boats were out there. We'd receive convoy routing intelligence, warnings from Admiralty about submarine concentrations, but finding them was another matter entirely. Our radar was designed for surface engagement against other warships. Against a U-boat's minimal cross-section, it was nearly useless beyond 4 or 5 miles, and even then only in calm seas. Night operations were exercises in futility. We'd patrol convoy flanks, hoping our lookouts might spot a silhouette. By the time we detected anything, the U-boat had already fired and crash-dived. We'd steam toward the attack position, dropping depth charges essentially at random, hoping for luck. The U-boat would be long gone, 400 feet deep, silent, invisible." The Allies tried various countermeasures, none particularly effective. Convoy sailing reduced losses but didn't stop attacks. More escort vessels helped, but spread limited naval resources impossibly thin. Coastal blackouts reduced silhouetting, but couldn't eliminate it. Aircraft patrols forced U-boats to submerge, but couldn't prosecute attacks at night. German U-boat commanders watching Allied countermeasures with professional interest remained supremely confident. The Allies were reacting, not innovating. Each defensive measure had a tactical counter. The fundamental equation remained unchanged. U-boats could detect targets before being detected, attack with impunity, and escape before effective response. What German naval intelligence had catastrophically failed to detect was a scientific breakthrough occurring in British and American research laboratories that would fundamentally alter the physics of submarine detection. In February 1940, British physicists John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham developed the cavity magnetron, a device that would prove as strategically significant as any weapon produced during the war. The cavity magnetron could generate microwave radiation at wavelengths measured in centimeters rather than meters, a seemingly academic distinction that had profound operational implications. Professor Samuel Thornton, an American physicist recruited to the MIT Radiation Laboratory in 1941, explained the principle in his post-war technical history. Earlier radar systems operated at wavelengths of 1.5 meters or longer. At these wavelengths, the physics of radar return is unfavorable for small targets. A submarine's conning tower, perhaps 20 feet tall and 8 feet wide, presents a radar cross-section measured in square meters. At meter wavelengths, this produces a weak return easily lost in sea clutter. Centimetric radar, operating at wavelengths of 10 centimeters or less, changes the equation completely. At these shorter wavelengths, the submarine's conning tower becomes a relatively large target. The radar return strengthens by orders of magnitude. Suddenly, detecting a surface U-boat at 10, 15, even 20 miles becomes not just possible, but routine. More critically, the shorter wavelength reduces sea clutter interference. Ocean waves are typically meters long, producing significant clutter at meter wavelengths. At centimeter wavelengths, wave clutter diminishes while the submarine return remains strong. The signal-to-noise ratio improves dramatically. The first operational centimetric radar, designated ASV Mark III, air-to-surface vessel, for aircraft and Type 271 for surface ships, entered service in early 1943. The systems operated at 10 centimeter wavelength S-band and later 3 centimeter wavelength X-band, with detection ranges against surfaced submarines exceeding 15 miles in good conditions. The impact was immediate and devastating for U-boats, though German commanders initially couldn't understand what was happening. February 21, 1943, Bay of Biscay. Captain Lieutenant Otto Brenner surfaced U-441 at 0230 hours, 200 miles west of La Rochelle, beginning the routine transit across the Bay of Biscay toward patrol stations in the North Atlantic. The night was moonless, visibility perhaps 1,000 yards, perfect conditions for surface running. Brenner's war diary entry from that night, recovered after the war, captured his confusion. 0237 hours, surfaced, beginning transit on course 285 degrees, sea state 2, visibility poor, no moon, conditions ideal for surface operations. 0312 hours, lookouts report aircraft engine noise bearing 190 degrees, ordered crash dive. Aircraft appeared suddenly from darkness, dropped flares directly over our position. Depth charges fell as we passed 40 meters. Severe damage to pressure hull. How did they find us? No radar warning, no visible searchlights before flares. Impossible detection. 0340 hours. Surface to assess damage and continue transit. Cannot remain submerged due to hull damage. 0418 hours. Second aircraft attack. Again, no warning. Aircraft appeared with no advance indication. Dropped flares and depth charges. 3 men wounded. Diving no longer possible due to hull damage. 0445 hours. Third aircraft attack. This time, aircraft illuminated us with searchlight from 2,000 meters before attacking. Cannot dive, cannot escape, ordered crew to abandon ship and scuttle. Conclusion: the enemy possesses detection capability we do not understand. They found us repeatedly in darkness without visible searchlights or warning. This represents a fundamental change in operational environment. Brenner's experience was being repeated across the U-boat fleet. Submarines that had operated with impunity for 2 years were suddenly being detected and attacked under conditions that should have made them invisible. Commander Richard Foster, piloting a Royal Air Force B-24 Liberator equipped with ASV Mark III radar during a Bay of Biscay patrol in March 1943, described the operational revolution. Previous patrols were exercises in hope. You'd fly your assigned sector, your crew scanning the ocean visually, hoping to spot a U-boat by chance. Detection ranges were perhaps 2 miles in daylight, essentially 0 at night. We might fly 12-hour patrols without a single contact. With the new radar, everything changed. The scope operator would call out contacts at 15, 18, even 22 miles. We'd vector toward the position, and there would be the U-boat, exactly where the radar indicated. They had no idea we were coming until we were practically overhead. The first few weeks, U-boats would surface after our initial attack, attempting to defend with anti-aircraft fire, standard procedure against previous aircraft. They didn't understand we could track them continuously. We'd circle back, watching them on radar, and attack again and again. They couldn't escape what they couldn't see.
April 8, 1943. Mid-Atlantic. Convoy HX-231. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Hoffmann positioned U-507 for attack on Convoy HX-231, a formation of 47 merchant ships bound from New York to Liverpool. His wolf pack, 6 U-boats coordinating their assault, had been shadowing the convoy for 3 days, waiting for the optimal attack moment. "All boats, attack commence," came the coded radio transmission from BDU, Befelshaber der U-Boote, U-boat command, at 0200 hours. Hoffmann ordered battle stations and began his surface approach from the convoy's dark quarter. The attack should have been textbook: surface approach at night, close to 2,000 meters, fire a spread of 4 torpedoes into the merchant formation, crash dive before escorts could respond, reload while deep, resurface, and reposition for a second attack. At 0224 hours, U-507's lookouts spotted the convoy's silhouettes at 8,000 meters. Hoffmann ordered course adjustments to optimize firing position. At 0231 hours, with the convoy at 3,500 meters and growing larger, he prepared to give the firing order. Then, everything went catastrophically wrong. The destroyer HMS Acheron, positioned 14 miles ahead of the convoy, had detected U-507 on Type 271 radar at 0218 hours, 6 minutes before Hoffmann's lookouts even spotted the convoy. The escort commander, Commander Michael Richardson, had immediately vectored Acheron toward the contact at full speed while maintaining radar tracking. At 0232 hours, Acheron illuminated U-507 with a powerful searchlight from 2,200 meters, far beyond the range at which U-boat lookouts could have detected the approaching destroyer. Hoffmann's reaction was instinctive. "Alarm!" The crew scrambled through the crash dive procedure. The diesel engines cut off, electric motors engaged, vents opened, ballast tanks flooded. U-507's bow angled down sharply. But Acheron was already firing. The destroyer's 4-inch guns sent shells screaming across the 2,000-meter gap. One shell struck U-507's conning tower just as the submarine passed through 15 meters depth, punching through the pressure hull and killing 2 men instantly. Water began flooding the control room. "Blow all tanks! Surface! Surface!" Hoffmann screamed, realizing the submarine couldn't survive submerged with a hull breach. U-507 erupted from the Atlantic in a fountain of spray, water cascading from the damaged conning tower. The crew stumbled onto the deck, preparing to man the anti-aircraft guns and fight on the surface,
the only option remaining. Acheron closed to 800 meters and opened fire with everything. 4-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikons, even small arms. Tracer fire lit the night like deadly fireworks. 3 more U-boats attempting to attack the convoy were caught in similar ambushes, detected by radar long before their lookouts spotted threats, engaged before they could crash dive or reposition. Hoffmann watched in horror as U-512, another Wolfpack member, was caught surfacing after a submerged approach, illuminated by searchlights and blown apart by depth charges that had been positioned exactly where the submarine would emerge. The escort had tracked the submerged U-boat and predicted its surfacing point with impossible accuracy. "How are they finding us?" Oberleutnant Mueller shouted over the gunfire. "There's no radar warning, no searchlight before they're right on top of us. They're tracking us in complete darkness from beyond visual range." Hoffmann had no answer. In 42 combat patrols, he'd never experienced anything like this. The Allies had always been reactive, responding to attacks, guessing at submarine positions, dropping depth charges based on estimates and hope. Now they were operating with precision and foreknowledge that suggested they could see invisible submarines from miles away. U-507 survived that night only because Hoffmann ordered an emergency dive despite the hull damage, gambling that the submarine could reach 200 meters before the flooding overwhelmed the pumps. The gamble succeeded. Barely. U-507 limped back to La Rochelle with 9 men dead and damage that would require 3 months to repair. 4 U-boats from the Wolfpack were destroyed that night. 3 others were so severely damaged they aborted patrols. The convoy lost 2 merchant ships, the lightest losses any convoy had suffered against a coordinated Wolfpack attack since 1941.
What made the April 8th massacre particularly devastating for the U-boat force was that German naval intelligence had no explanation for what was happening. Korvettenkapitän Wilhelm Hartmann, chief of U-boat technical intelligence at BDU headquarters, compiled reports from returning commanders throughout March and April 1943. His summary, submitted to Admiral Dönitz on April 20th, revealed the extent of German confusion. Analysis of 37 patrol reports from March-April indicates systematic Allied detection capability that exceeds all previous parameters. Summary of anomalies. U-boats detected and attacked in darkness at ranges exceeding visual detection by factor of 5 to 10. Aircraft appearing from nowhere with no radar warning from METOX receivers. Escort vessels vectoring directly toward submerged U-boats as if tracking continuously. Attack timing suggests advance warning of U-boat positions before visual contact possible. Multiple reports of impossible detection where U-boats should have been invisible. Current METOX radar warning receivers detect no Allied radar transmissions before attacks commence. This suggests either Allies have developed radar operating at frequencies METOX cannot detect, or Allies have developed alternative detection method, possibly infrared, acoustic, or other technology. Recommendation: assume Allied detection capabilities have fundamentally changed. Previous operational assumptions regarding stealth and invisibility are no longer valid. U-boat force must adapt to environment where submarines can be detected at extended ranges regardless of sea state, visibility, or time of day. Dönitz's response was to blame the METOX devices themselves, theorizing that the receivers were emitting detectable radiation that allowed Allied direction finding. This was incorrect. The Allies weren't tracking METOX emissions, but it led to METOX receivers being turned off, eliminating the U-boat's only warning system against the older meter wavelength radars. The reality was worse than German intelligence imagined. Not only had the Allies developed Centimetric radar invisible to German warning receivers, they had also refined it into an extraordinarily effective detection system deployed on both aircraft and surface vessels. By May 1943, virtually every Allied escort vessel crossing the Atlantic carried Type 271 radar. Every long-range patrol aircraft carried ASV Mark III. The detection net was comprehensive and inescapable.
The month of May 1943 became known in the U-boat force as Black May. a period of losses so severe that Dönitz would temporarily withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic, effectively conceding defeat in the Battle of the Atlantic. The statistics were catastrophic. Allied merchant ship losses in May 1943, 50 ships, 264,000 gross registered tons. U-boat losses in May 1943, 43 submarines destroyed, 6 severely damaged and forced to abort. The kill ratio had reversed from 83-1 in Germany's favor to nearly 1-1. Even worse, the tonnage sunk per U-boat at sea had collapsed from 700 tons per day in 1942 to less than 50 tons per day in May 1943. Kapitänleutnant Friedrich Weber, one of the few commanders to complete a successful patrol in May, reported to Dönitz personally on May 28. The Atlantic has become a death trap. We operated submerged for 18 of 21 days on patrol, unprecedented endurance that exhausted the crew and depleted batteries. Yet every time we surfaced, day or night, regardless of weather, we were detected within 30 minutes. On May 11th, we surfaced at 3:40 hours in heavy seas, visibility less than 500 meters, to recharge batteries. Within 15 minutes, an aircraft appeared and attacked. No radar warning, no sound of engines until attack was already underway. We crash-dived with batteries at 40% capacity. On May 17th, we surfaced at 22:20 hours, moonless night, no horizon visible. Within 20 minutes, a destroyer appeared from darkness and illuminated us with searchlight from 3,000 meters. They knew exactly where we were before illumination. We barely escaped. The men believe the Allies can see through water. They believe we are being tracked continuously by some supernatural method. Morale is destroyed. They know that every time we surface, something we must do to survive, we are detected and attacked. This is not warfare. This is systematic extermination of a force that cannot hide. Weber's testimony aligned with dozens of similar reports. U-boat commanders were independently reaching the same conclusion. The ocean surface had become transparent to Allied detection, the darkness no longer provided cover, and the submarine's fundamental advantage, stealth, had been negated by technology they couldn't see or understand. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Dönitz made the decision that effectively ended Germany's Atlantic campaign. He ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes and redeploy to areas with less concentrated Allied defenses. His war diary entry was stark. The enemy has succeeded through new detection devices, radar and other location equipment, in rendering the U-boat's main advantage, surprise attack from invisibility, ineffective. The U-boat has become visible. A weapon visible to the enemy before it can attack has lost its primary tactical value. We have lost 43 boats this month, 31% of operational force. At this rate, the entire U-boat fleet will be destroyed within 6 months while achieving negligible results against enemy shipping. Continuation of operations in current form is not warfare, but suicide. I am withdrawing U-boats from North Atlantic until technical countermeasures can be developed. We cannot fight what we cannot detect, cannot evade what tracks us continuously, cannot survive in an environment where invisibility no longer exists. The withdrawal marked the effective end of the Battle of the Atlantic as a contest. The Allies had won through technology that made the ocean transparent to electromagnetic eyes, while German submarines remained blind.
June 1943 marked the beginning of Germany's desperate attempt to develop countermeasures against Allied radar detection. The Kriegsmarine's Technical Research Division, working with scientists from Telefunken and other electronics firms, rushed to create radar warning receivers that could detect centimeter wavelengths. The result was the Naxos radar detector, deployed to U-boats beginning in August 1943. Unlike the earlier Methawks receiver,
Naxos could theoretically detect 9 to 10 centimeter wavelength radar transmissions from Allied aircraft and ships. Oberleutnant Tusse Karl Dietrich, commanding U-382 on its first patrol with Naxos equipment installed, reported initial optimism in his war diary. August 12, 1943. Departed La Rochelle with new Naxos detection equipment. Technical officer assures us this device will detect enemy centimeter radar, providing advance warning of aircraft and surface vessel approach. If true, this restores our primary advantage, the ability to dive before detection becomes attack. August 15, 1943. Naxos proved its worth today. Device detected radar transmission at 0640 hours. Crash dived immediately. Aircraft appeared overhead 3 minutes later, dropped depth charges on our estimated position. Escaped without damage. First successful evasion in 5 months. Crew morale improved significantly. But the celebration was premature. Allied radar operators quickly discovered they could detect U-boats, track their positions, and vector attacking forces toward them while operating radar in short pulses that Naxos couldn't reliably detect. More devastatingly, Naxos only warned of detection, it didn't prevent it. U-boats detected by radar were forced to crash dive, abandoning surface transit and battery charging, leading to extended submerged operations that exhausted crews and batteries. Kapitän Lieutenant Hans Becker, commanding U-219, discovered the tactical trap during an October 1943 patrol. The Naxos warns us we're being tracked, but this knowledge changes nothing operationally. We dive to escape immediate attack, but we must surface again within 18 to 24 hours to recharge batteries. The moment we surface, radar detects us again. Naxos warns again. We dive again. The cycle repeats endlessly. We are reduced to surfacing for 15-minute intervals, just long enough to partially recharge before radar detection forces another dive. This is insufficient for full battery charging or adequate diesel running time. The boat remains perpetually at 40 to 60% battery capacity. Navigation becomes guesswork. We can barely make headway toward patrol stations. The crew is exhausted from constant diving stations. 3 men have collapsed from fatigue. The boat stinks of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and desperation. We have been at sea 31 days and sunk nothing. This is not submarine warfare. It is underwater imprisonment. The Germans also attempted to reduce radar signature through technology. The Schnorkel device, a retractable breathing tube that allowed diesel engine operation while submerged at periscope depth, entered service in mid-1944. In theory, schnorkels would allow U-boats to remain submerged continuously, charging batteries and transiting without surfacing. In practice, schnorkels created as many problems as they solved. The head valve, designed to close when waves washed over it, created a pressure differential inside the submarine that ruptured eardrums and caused nosebleeds among crew members. The diesel engines, starved of oxygen when the valve closed, would draw air from inside the submarine, creating sudden pressure drops that felt like being punched in the ears. More critically, the schnorkel head itself presented a radar signature. While smaller than a fully surfaced conning tower, it was still detectable by improved Allied radars at ranges exceeding 8 miles. U-boats running on schnorkel discovered they were still being detected and attacked. Korvettenkapitän Werner Schultz, commanding U-764 equipped with schnorkel, wrote bitterly in November 1944. The schnorkel was supposed to restore our invisibility. Instead, it has created new misery without solving the fundamental problem. Yes, we can remain submerged while running diesels, but the enemy radar still finds us. We thought the schnorkel head would be invisible to radar. We were wrong. Yesterday, we were attacked twice while snorkeling,
once by aircraft, once by destroyer. Both found us from ranges suggesting radar detection. The snorkel makes us slower, more vulnerable, and only marginally harder to detect. Meanwhile, the crew suffers physical agony from pressure changes and carbon dioxide buildup.
The Bay of Biscay, the U-boat's primary transit route between French bases and Atlantic patrol stations, became a gauntlet of radar-equipped aircraft that made surface transit suicidal. Allied air patrols operated 24-hour coverage using Centimetric radar that could detect surfaced or snorkeling U-boats at ranges exceeding 20 miles. During July 1943 alone, Allied aircraft detected and attacked 107 U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. 16 were sunk. 42 were damaged and forced to return to base. Only 12 completed transit to patrol stations without being attacked. The German response was to order U-boats to transit on the surface in daylight, manning anti-aircraft guns to fight off attacking aircraft rather than diving. This fight-back policy, implemented in June 1943, was based on the theory that aircraft were vulnerable to concentrated anti-aircraft fire and that U-boats could shoot their way through the Bay of Biscay. The policy was catastrophic. Oberlieutenant Sir Heinrich Wolff, commanding U-415, experienced the reality on June 24, 1943. Transiting Bay of Biscay on surface, full anti-aircraft armament manned. Naxos detected radar at 10:40 hours. Instead of diving per standard procedure, new orders require us to remain surfaced and fight. 10:47 hours. 4 Beaufighters appeared from different compass points, coordinating attack. Our 20mm and 37mm guns opened fire. 1 aircraft hit, trailing smoke, but continuing attack. Other 3 pressed home attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Our gun crews were magnificent, brave beyond description, but cannon shells from aircraft guns are devastating. 20mm Hispano cannon shells from Beaufighters tore through gun crews like scythes. In 90 seconds, 7 men killed, 12 wounded. Conning tower looked like slaughterhouse. Ordered emergency dive with wounded still on deck, no choice. Took 3 wounded men below, left 4 dead on deck. Crash dive to 120 meters. Aircraft dropped depth charges, severe damage to pressure hull. Returning to base with 11 casualties and crippled boat. The fight-back policy is suicide. Aircraft can attack from beyond effective range of our guns, coordinate from multiple directions, and maintain attacks while we reload. Our gun crews, exposed on deck, are defenseless against cannon fire. This is not combat. It is target practice with our men as targets. After losing 31 U-boats in July-August 1943 to Bay of Biscay air attacks, the fight-back policy was quietly abandoned. U-boats returned to diving when detected, but this meant extended submerged transits that consumed batteries and compressed patrol times, further reducing effectiveness. By September 1943, the average U-boat was spending 11 days transiting to patrol stations, 14 days on patrol, and 11 days transiting home, of which only 4 to 6 days were actually spent surfaced due to constant radar detection forcing dives. The operational tempo had collapsed.
What made Allied radar supremacy insurmountable wasn't just the technology itself, but the industrial scale at which it was deployed and continuously improved. American production capacity transformed radar from experimental equipment into standard-issue systems deployed across hundreds of escort vessels and aircraft. By September 1943, the following radar systems were operational in the Atlantic. Surface vessels. Type 271, 10-centimeter wavelength, installed on 847 escort vessels, detection range 15+ miles against surfaced U-boats. Type 272, 10-centimeter wavelength, upgraded version with improved discrimination, 573 installations. SG's Surface Search Radar, 10-centimeter, American design system on U.S. Navy vessels, 412 installations. Combined total, over 1,800 escort vessels equipped with Centimetric surface search radar. Aircraft. ASV Mark III, 9.7 centimeter wavelength, 923 aircraft installations on RAF Coastal Command aircraft. ASV Mark IV, 3 centimeter wavelength, next generation system with 25-plus mile detection range, 318 installations by January 1944. APS-15, 3 centimeter wavelength, American Naval Aviation Radar, 687 installations on carrier-based and land-based patrol aircraft. Combined total, over 1,900 maritime patrol aircraft equipped with Centimetric air-to-surface radar. Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief U.S. Atlantic Fleet, quantified the operational advantage in a December 1943 assessment. Our radar coverage of the North Atlantic approaches 100% saturation. Any U-boat surfacing within 300 miles of established convoy routes will be detected within 30 minutes by overlapping air and surface patrols. Detection is not dependent on weather, visibility, or time of day. We have effectively made the ocean's surface transparent to electromagnetic observation. German attempts at countermeasures have proven inadequate. Their warning receivers alert them to detection but cannot prevent it. Their schnorkels reduce but do not eliminate radar signature. Their acoustic torpedoes and enhanced anti-aircraft armament cannot compensate for their fundamental problem. They cannot hide. The continuous improvement of Allied radar illustrated American industrial warfare at its peak. When Naxos detectors appeared, Allied engineers modified radar systems to use shorter pulses and lower power settings that maintained detection capability while reducing Naxos effectiveness. When schnorkels reduced signature, American engineers developed radar sets operating at 3 centimeter wavelength with enhanced discrimination that could detect schnorkel heads at extended ranges. Lieutenant Commander Robert Harrison, serving with the U.S. Navy's Electronic Warfare Division, described the development cycle. We'd receive intelligence that Germans had deployed a new countermeasure. Within 2 weeks, our engineers would have a technical response in prototype form. Within 6 weeks, modified radar sets would be shipping to operational units. Within 3 months, the countermeasure would be neutralized across the entire fleet. This wasn't individual genius, it was industrial process. We had dozens of electronics firms working in parallel. MIT Radiation Laboratory alone employed 4,000 scientists and engineers working on radar development. Bell Labs, General Electric, Westinghouse, all contributing. When one approach hit obstacles, 3 alternatives were already in development. The Germans couldn't match this pace. They had brilliant scientists, but lacked industrial capacity and inter-service coordination. By the time they'd deploy a countermeasure, we'd already deployed the counter-countermeasure. They were perpetually one generation behind in a technological race that moved at industrial speed.
By late 1943, the psychological impact of continuous radar detection had broken U-boat crews' morale completely. The certainty that surfacing meant detection, that the enemy could see them through darkness, through weather, through conditions that should have made them invisible, created a pervasive terror that no amount of tactical training could overcome. Oberleutnant zur See Martin Fischer, U-boat medical officer assigned to evaluate crew psychological status, submitted a classified report to BDU in January 1944. Quote, "I have examined crew members from 23 returning U-boats. The psychological profile is consistent and alarming. Symptoms include acute anxiety manifesting physically, tremors, rapid heartbeat, hyperventilation when surfacing, sleep disruption, inability to sleep during off-duty hours due to fear of sudden attack, paranoid ideation, belief that enemy can track submarines even when submerged, depression and fatalism, acceptance that patrol will end in death, not return. Physical symptoms, chronic headaches, digestive problems, weight loss averaging 8 to 12 kilograms per patrol. These are not isolated cases, but represent the majority of examined personnel. The psychological term is combat stress reaction, but the underlying cause is specific. The crews believe they are being hunted by an enemy who can see them when they cannot see the enemy. This creates a fundamental psychological asymmetry that destroys combat effectiveness. Most concerning, 67% of examined personnel expressed willingness to surrender immediately upon depth charge attack, rather than attempt survival and continued patrol. This represents complete collapse of fighting spirit. These men no longer believe they can survive, so they have stopped trying. The evidence of psychological breakdown appeared throughout patrol reports. Commanders reported crews refusing to surface even when batteries were critically depleted. Men volunteered for shore duty at reduced rank to avoid patrol assignments. Instances of self-inflicted wounds increased. Most tellingly, U-boats were returning from patrols having made no attacks, commanders keeping boats submerged for entire patrols, achieving nothing but survival. Kapitän Lieutenant Ernst Vogel, commanding U-228, returned from a 47-day patrol in February 1944, having expended no torpedoes and made no attacks. His patrol report was brutally honest. Quote, "I kept the boat submerged for 39 of 47 days at sea. Every time we surfaced, Naxos detected radar within 20 to 30 minutes, forcing crash dive. After the 8th forced dive, I decided survival was more important than attacking. The crew's psychological state could not sustain continued detection and evasion. When we did surface for absolutely necessary battery charging, the crew was in state of terror. Men vomited from anxiety. 2 collapsed and had to be carried below when crash dive was ordered. The youngest crew members, some only 18 years old, cried openly. I achieved nothing on this patrol. I sank no ships, gathered no intelligence, contributed nothing to the war effort, but I brought 47 men home alive. Given the alternatives, I consider this success." Admiral Donitz's response was to relieve Vogel of command for failure to engage the enemy with necessary aggression. But Vogel's experience was becoming the norm, not the exception. U-boats were increasingly ineffective, not because they couldn't find targets, but because commanders prioritized survival over engagement. Rational behavior when engagement meant near-certain detection and probable destruction.
After Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence officers interrogated captured U-boat commanders extensively, seeking to understand how completely radar detection had broken the U-boat threat. The assessments were unanimous. Centimetric radar had been the decisive weapon of the Atlantic campaign. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Hoffmann, who survived U-507's damage in April 1943 and commanded 2 additional U-boats before war's end, provided the most comprehensive analysis during his interrogation at the London Cage in June 1945. You ask what defeated the U-boat force? One word: radar. Not depth charges, not convoy escorts, not aircraft numbers. Radar. Everything else was secondary. In 1942, we owned the night and the surface. We could detect targets visually before being detected. We could attack from invisibility. This made us unstoppable despite inferior numbers. Convoy escorts were reactive, responding to attacks, guessing at our positions, hoping to get lucky with depth charges. In 1943, everything reversed. Suddenly, you could see us from 20 miles away in complete darkness. Our fundamental advantage, invisibility, vanished. We became prey instead of hunters. The ocean's surface became lethal. We were forced to operate submerged, which reduced our speed, range, and effectiveness by 70%. The psychological impact was worse than the tactical impact. Men who had been confident hunters became terrified prey. They knew, everyone knew, that surfacing meant detection,
Detection meant attack, and attack probably meant death. This knowledge destroyed morale more effectively than any weapon. We tried countermeasures. All failed. Warning receivers told us we were detected, but couldn't prevent detection. Snorkels reduced but didn't eliminate radar signature. Enhanced armament couldn't protect against attacks from beyond engagement range. Acoustic torpedoes couldn't stop radar-guided aircraft and escorts. Your Centimetric radar was the secret weapon that won the Atlantic War, not because it directly destroyed U-boats, though it did, but because it made submarine operations impossible. A weapon that cannot hide cannot fight. You made us visible, and visibility for submarines is death. Admiral Karl Donitz, interrogated at Nuremberg before his trial, was asked to identify the single factor that defeated the U-boat campaign. His response was bitter, but analytically precise. Radar. 10-centimeter wavelength radar that we could neither detect reliably nor counter effectively. This technology transformed the Atlantic from an operational environment where submarines held advantage to a death trap where submarine operations became suicide. I committed 1,162 U-boats to combat operations during the war. We lost 784, 67.5% of boats committed. Approximately 28,000 submariners served. Approximately 28,000 died. This is the highest casualty rate of any military branch in any nation during the war. We achieved these catastrophic losses while failing to stop Allied supply convoys or significantly impact Allied strategic operations after mid-1943. Radar detection achieved what all Allied weapons could not. It made the submarine visible. Once visible, the submarine's tactical advantages disappeared. You didn't need to outfight us. You just needed to see us. Your radar did that. Everything else followed inevitably.
In 1982, at a symposium on naval warfare at the U.S. Naval War College, Admiral Arleigh Burke, former Chief of Naval Operations and Destroyer Commander during World War II, was asked to identify the single most important technological development of the naval war. His answer, delivered to an audience of naval officers and historians, closed to the circle that began with German confidence in U-boat invisibility. Radar, specifically centimetric wavelength radar that could detect submarines at extended ranges regardless of weather or visibility. This technology ended submarine supremacy more completely than all the depth charges, escorts, and aircraft combined. I commanded destroyers in the Atlantic in 1943-44. We sank 3 U-boats using radar-directed attacks. Before centimetric radar, we'd patrol convoy flanks, hoping our lookouts might spot a periscope or conning tower. Detection ranges were hundreds of yards on a good day. At night, forget it. With the new radar, everything changed. We'd detect surfaced U-boats at 12, 15, 18 miles, far beyond visual range. We could track them continuously, vector aircraft toward them, coordinate attacks while they were still invisible to human eyes. The ocean became transparent. The Germans never adapted. They thought they could counter radar with warning receivers and reduced signatures. They didn't understand that the fundamental equation had changed. Their submarines were designed to hide on the surface and attack from invisibility. Once we could see them electronically, their entire tactical doctrine collapsed. I talked to U-boat commanders after the war. One told me, "You didn't defeat us with better tactics or braver crews. You defeated us by making the impossible possible. Seeing invisible submarines from ranges we thought impossible. Once you could do that, we were finished. A submarine that can be seen from 20 miles away isn't a submarine anymore. It's just a slow, vulnerable target." That's the lesson. Technology that changes fundamental operational assumptions wins wars. Radar changed the assumption that submarines were invisible. That single change decided the Battle of the Atlantic. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had proven that reliability and firepower defeat elegance. The M4 Sherman had proven that sustainability defeats superiority. The centimetric radar had proven that detection defeats stealth.
In each case, Allied industrial warfare, the application of mass production, technological innovation, and systematic operations had overcome Axis tactical excellence and engineering sophistication. The pattern was consistent. American and British military systems won not through individual superiority, but through systemic advantage operating at industrial scale. For the U-boat force, the moment of realization came in May 1943, when Admiral Dönitz withdrew from the North Atlantic after losing 43 submarines in 1 month. For individual submariners, it came earlier, the first time they surfaced in darkness and were immediately attacked by enemies they never saw, guided by radar they couldn't detect, guided by technology they never understood in a war they couldn't win once the ocean became transparent to electromagnetic eyes. The U-boats had entered the war as invisible hunters. They ended it as illuminated prey, tracked continuously by radar that could see through darkness, through weather, through the ocean's vastness, from ranges that seemed impossible until they became routine. The laughter of U-boat commanders in 1942, celebrating their invisible dominance of the Atlantic, had died by 1943. The radar operators were watching, and the U-boats, despite all their courage, despite all their skill, despite all their tactical excellence, never had a chance once the Allies learned to see in radio waves. In the end, you cannot hide from electromagnetic radiation. And for submarines whose only protection was hiding, that truth was final.